So how do we start this now? Okay. So my name is Allwell. It's my pleasure speaking to you today, Ayo. So my first question, I'll go directly to the point.
Sure.
How does it feel to have your story, The Man From Abeokuta, shortlisted for the Afritondo Prize? How did you feel upon hearing the news, and how do you feel now?
I feel the same now as I did when I heard the news. It was really, really exciting. I was really pleased because, I've been writing for a while, but just for pleasure for myself. You share with family and friends, but never, having that validation from someone who's not in my family, from an outside person to say that, I read this and I enjoyed it. So being shortlisted, it felt really great. I was ecstatic. I was really beside myself with joy because, when somebody who's not obliged to say they like your story reads it and says they like it, you think that's a validation of sorts. So I felt good, and I still feel good now. I wouldn't say it's surreal, but it's really, really pleasing because obviously I was aware of Afritondo in the past, and I was seeing, what you did last year, I think. So I thought, oh, wow, maybe one day, and today's that day.
Okay, that's really interesting what you say about them. So what spurred you? What motivated you to submit for this prize? Because you say you've been writing for some years now, and how do you see yourself as a writer? Because obviously you do this alongside other activities like your job, etc. How do they inspire you, and how do they sort of influence your writing, your other activities?
Yeah, so you see, for me, when I first, I'm a lawyer by profession, but there was always a writer inside struggling to get out. But I'm of the generation where, back in the day, your parents would say, be a lawyer or be a doctor or something. So you do what your parents say. There was always parts of me that was drawn to, something more creative. And so that was inside. But when I did start to dabble in writing, it wasn't really fiction. It was more like essays and opinion pieces, things like that. So when I decided to try my hand at fiction, I think it's a very different genre. It's a very different discipline, having to make something up from scratch as opposed to commenting on something that's happening in the world or something of interest. So I found it quite challenging at first. And, you read it and you think, would anybody like this? But I took some encouragement from speaking to friends and family. And then also, I did say to myself, I'm going to try and bring to bear various life experiences I've had and write the kind of story I would like to read and, explain things in a way that, I think that people who have a different background to me, people who have had different experiences from me would be able to understand where I'm coming from. And all of that within 5,000 words. So you have to bring that, brevity is essential, isn't it? Bring that discipline to what you write. And I like that as well. I like the short story form because you've got a limited amount of words and you have to then say what you need to say in those words and no more.
Okay, quite interesting. Is writing like just more of a hobby or pastime for you? Because I noticed you did say it was a hobby because you got into the legal profession and all of that, or is it something you want to dedicate more time to, as I don't know, as you will in the future? What is writing to you, really?
Well, my situation has changed recently, so I've left work.
Okay.
I'm probably much older than I look. So I've left the workplace. So I have more time now to devote to, things that really interest me. And one of them is writing. One of them is definitely writing. And so, being involved in this competition, for instance, it's and being shortlisted is a big encouragement because, you don't want to do things that, you think you're no good at. And so being told by people that, we enjoyed the story, we liked it, it's very encouraging. So I feel very encouraged by this process to actually write more. So I've got some thoughts about what I would like to write, the kind of writing I'm interested in. I've got some thoughts about that. And I'm an avid reader. I read quite a lot. And so you read the authors that you admire and you think, wow, how did they get to be that good? Could I ever be that good? So it's a challenge. Like you guys have thrown down the gauntlet to me in a sense. And so I'm very encouraged and I want to write more. And as you said, I have more time now to actually devote to that. And also what I'm finding is, in writing this Man From Abeokuta, this story, it wasn't so much the inspiration that got me, it was the discipline. Having to, there was a deadline to submit it, there was a word limit, there was a theme. So it wasn't just write whatever you like. I had to be very disciplined and keep to the brief, keep focused to get it all done in the time, that was allotted for it, and the word limits as well. And then submit it on time, follow the instructions. And here we are.
Okay, I mean, let me push you a bit on that process, maybe for the sake of other aspiring writers. When did you start writing your story? How long did it take you? How long before the deadline did you submit? And what was the writing process like for this story? Is it the story you had written before, or you had a draft, or was it a news, project for you?
So I had a draft, but it wasn't on the theme. I had a draft of something. You see, I've been thinking about writing for quite a few, thinking about it. And, I got into this habit of when I'm out and about, maybe on the bus or on the train or something, have a little notebook. And, I might overhear a snippet of conversation, don't know, just somebody's random conversation. And it might be interesting. And I'd write it down and then keep it. And that was how this story came about. I overheard something on the bus and I wrote it down and I kept it. And I kept it, this is quite, probably about 5-6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then I put something down on paper to capture, the flavor of this thing I overheard. But I didn't really know what to do with it. And I wasn't sure, whether I would ever do anything with it. And then when I saw this competition advertised, and the theme was, alien, then it got me thinking about, putting a spin on it. And that's when I actually started to write the story. So I began to craft the story. It wasn't a story before then, it was an idea. I began to make it into a story when the advert went out saying that, this was the theme. And then I kind of had an idea of how I could fit it around the theme and bring out certain other themes within that as well to make the points I wanted to make. In terms of my process, it was just, there's loads of stuff. Loads of writers, established writers say, write every day or set aside the time, all those things. And I mean, that's good in theory, but the reality was, I was aware of the deadline to submit because I have more time on my hands. I was able to write every day. Yeah. And writing is editing. It's editing, really. So once I got the first draft down, was going back every day and then thinking of new things, taking away some other things, editing.
How long did it take you, the process?
Oh, the process took me in total, I would say, about 3 weeks.
3 weeks, okay.
Yeah, about 3 weeks, yeah. And that was going back, editing. Then I showed the first draft. I showed maybe the fourth or fifth draft to my wife, and she sort of made some comments and said she didn't like it. And I thought, oh, okay, back and did some more editing, So it was a long process of editing and then thinking of things. And then I got it how I wanted it, and then I kept rereading it. And then also, on the laptop, I kind of played it aloud so I could hear it.
Okay.
Back to myself. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you had something, you just had to fine tune it, to.
That's it. I finessed it as much as I could before the submission. I submitted I think it was probably about maybe almost 2 weeks before the closing date. So I submitted in very good time. So I was finished and I was happy with what I'd written, at least a fortnight before the closing date.
Okay. I mean, you've answered some of the questions I'd written down to ask.
Don't worry.
But I'll still ask one of them, which is, where do you get the inspiration for your stories, the ideas? I know you've touched on that a bit, but if I were to ask you that, where do you get inspiration for your stories? What would you say?
Yeah. I think I like to think I'm a very keen observer of human nature. And, in my working life, for instance, as a prosecutor, you come across, good, bad, indifferent, all kinds of people, and very often in extreme situations. If you're going to court, you've been charged with an offense of some sort. So, and then you pick up little snippets of conversation. Sometimes it could be a defendant talking to his wife or talking to her husband, or someone telling off the child. And then some things they say, or the way in which they say it, kind of sticks with you.
Yeah.
It could be, a certain idiom that they use, certain phrase they use, the way the child answers back. You hear all these things. And then I started, like I said, I then had this little notebook, which I would take on my travels and just overhear bits of people's random conversations. And then just think, oh, that would be a fantastic story. And then I began to imagine, what could they be going through? What kind of life do they lead? how different is their life to mine, and what story that could, evolve into if I had the ability to write the story. And then I'd mentioned this to my family, and they said, well, why don't you write it? You've explained it to us what you're trying to do. Why don't you actually put it on paper and see how you get on with it? And that's what I started to do, which is why I was fortunate that I already had, the basis of the story when, this competition was advertised, and I was able to now expand on it. But that's how I like to get my ideas, because it's really people are really interesting. People are really interesting.
Yes, true. I will second that. I mean, from experiences, and I mean, it's always good also to have something that matches closely to the theme that you can
That's right.
always work around. Let me ask you a slightly tricky one. I mean, you've not seen the other stories, but what do you think? What do you think it was about your story that the judges picked it? What do you think they saw in it? If I asked you that, if I put you in the spot there, what do you think is so interesting about your story that the judges thought, okay, this should be on the shortlist?
I mean, I think, I hope this doesn't sound sort of boastful or something, but I think maybe the use of language. I think maybe I like the way I use language. I like language, and so even when I wrote, non-fiction essays and things, I try to, because I mean, the bottom line is that it has to be interesting.
Yes.
And, in the short story format, you've got limited amount of words. So you've got to be concise. And sometimes the way you use language can help with that. So I thought, I used language pretty well to try and, establish certain, express certain ideas. Because you see, and also the theme as well, it gave you a lot of scope to use language how you, saw fit. I mean, I have to be honest, when I saw the theme, my initial thought was the film, the film Alien.
Oh, okay.
By Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
And then in the story, I made a couple of film references in the story because that was my initial thought. This is like, Alien. I thought of the film. Then my legal brain kicked in, and I thought about, the legal definition of an alien, somebody in a foreign country. Then I thought about alienation, the concept of being alienated. And I think I brought all three things into the story.
Yes, I think that's the idea, is to have a broad theme that writers can play around with and be creative with. So yes, I mean, there were different stories that adopted those strands that you just mentioned, which is quite interesting. What is an alien and who is an alien? Depends really on your perspectives. But and reading your story is. I don't want to go into it too much, but yeah, I obviously enjoyed reading it. You've talked about the use of language, and it was interesting that the characters there, the British characters, were speaking Yoruba and all of that. But when you made reference to this concept of Japa and reverse Japa, I found that interesting. Right. What's your view on this trend? I mean, obviously, your story was in relation to the health sector, doctors having to move out of Nigeria. But what's your view of this concept of Japa and now reverse Japa?
Well, in the Nigerian context, this whole idea of Japa is always one way. Japa is one way, isn't it? Where you say, everybody wants to Japa, go abroad, leave Nigeria and go somewhere else, and that got me thinking because. Sometimes, you have to sort of think of something different, something contrary, So I'm a contrarian. So I'm thinking, what about if people were to go back to Nigeria? As opposed to everybody going one way, what about somebody who now thinks I've got to go back, that there's more for me there than there is here, for instance, wherever you japa to, there's more in Nigeria. And so it wasn't to preach or anything, or to say that any reader, of Nigerian heritage should return, but it was more to kind of put out the question: what if people go back? Because you have to put it into a context of why are people leaving in the first place. People japa for a variety of reasons, and I'm trying to sort of put out the thought that hang on, what if people were to go back with all the skills that we've acquired from where we japa to? And take those skills back to Nigeria, maybe it would be a different kind of society. So it got me thinking. And also, recently, a couple of months ago, I was listening to the radio, and there was an interesting article on Radio 4 about Nigerian doctors specifically being recruited in Nigeria to come and work in NHS here.
Yeah.
And then when I listened to it, I thought, oh, this fits in with, what I'd been thinking about. And then it came to be like I was able to incorporate some of that into the story.
Yes, I mean, really interesting one, the concept of brain drain, from African countries.
That's right.
Yeah, but I mean, for you're not like a professional writer, but you've always found a way to incorporate writing into your daily life.
That's right.
Do you have any advice for writers, generally? Maybe other people who are aspiring to write or who want to be on the shortlist just like you. I mean, what is your advice for writers?
I would say just do it, to borrow a famous slogan. I would say just do it, because a lot of it's about confidence. And, you think when you read somebody else's story, you think, oh, I couldn't do that. But you can. There's so many stories to be told. And I mean, my attitude has always been, who better to tell them than the people that own the story. So if you have something to say, something that is really, I mean, like we've just spoken about Jack Bauer and thing, if something you want to say, then say it and find a way to get your voice heard. And I mean, in this day and age, with the number of competitions out there, the number of opportunities, number of platforms that have been created for people to share their work, you have an opportunity to actually be heard, have your voice heard. So I would just say to people, just do it, go for it. That's the first point. Second point, I'd also say to any aspiring writer is, for me, I've always found that writing things down really helps me to think better, to think clearly. So, I might have an idea in my head, but when I then put it to paper, I commit it to paper and read it, then you realize maybe how flawed my argument is or how illogical, So when you write it down, it brings that clarity to your thought processes. And that really helps as well. So I would just say to people, write it down and just go for it. And, all the best, because I mean, there's an element of luck as well. Lots of good stories for yours to get chosen. So
yes, I know, because I mean, sometimes I wonder, how they judge, because I see the long list before we to send them across, and it's a tough job choosing those stories. So I mean, sometimes it can be down to the preferences of judges.
That's right.
To see, I mean, it's a huge achievement being on the shortlist, by itself. Yeah. But what would it mean to you to actually win the prize?
Oh wow! I mean, given that this is my first real stab at short fiction, and this is the first competition.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow! First time blocking.
Wow. So it would just be, I mean, I don't even know how to express it in words. I'd be, over the moon because, and I mean, it'd be remarkable, wouldn't it? First time out.
Yeah, certainly.
And then to win first, it would be, wow, how you couldn't make that up. So,
yeah.
It'd be remarkable. I mean, and the encouragement I would take from that would just be, fantastic. You think, well, I must be doing something right.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because I must say, I mean, there were quite a few established writers, some of whom did not even make the long list. And how does it feel to actually see your story, perform so well in the midst of these excellent stories from excellent writers, some of whom have won several prizes, in the past?
I have to be honest, really honest. I was shocked. I didn't expect at all to be long. I just thought, and also, I mean, there was a particular part of the story I worried about, and that was the swearing.
Okay.
I worried about the swearing because I thought, I don't know whether, the judges, the panel, the people that, whether they would think it was necessary, whether they think it drove the story.
Mm-hmm.
I could have written it without it, but I thought it gave it a flavor, So I thought I'm going to leave it in. I'm going to leave it in against, comments from families saying maybe you should take it out. I thought I'm going to leave it in. And I did. And with hindsight, I'm glad that I did. So yeah, there was an element of shock. And now that, I'm aware that, there are established writers, I'm looking at the long list. I recognize some of the names from the long list of the year before and things. So there are people that are really on the circuit that write. There are people that are, much more qualified than me to get to this stage of the competition. I know that I'm in very exalted company, but I feel very proud of myself. I feel very proud. I feel very encouraged, but by also, as you said, beginner's luck as well. So there is that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's never too late to start, and obviously too. And sometimes if you had not submitted, you wouldn't have, made it this far. So sometimes it's good to take that leap to, have faith in your own work and,
That's right.
see
I mean,
how-
my initial thought was that no matter the outcome of I was hoping that, even if I could just get feedback
Yeah.
from, yourself, from the judges and say, we liked it, but, it wasn't good enough to be longlisted for argument's sake, but we like this or that about it. That would have been enough for me because, like I said, it's really important when you have people who don't owe you anything, there are no, family bonds or friendship ties to sort of say nice things about a badly written story. So if you don't like it, you just say, listen, we like this bit, but not that bit, or, do better, or maybe not so much this or that. So I would have really, valued any feedback on the story, even if I wasn't longlisted. So to get this far, it's a real shock and a real achievement, which I'm very grateful.
Certainly. We will be wrapping up shortly. Just one last question. You've tried your hand at short fiction. You seem to be doing very well. Are you going to be writing a novel soon?
I don't know. I think that's a different discipline entirely, isn't it? It's a different discipline entirely. Definitely. I've got a very short span of attention. I love reading short stories. I really love reading them, and so I think it's a real
other anthologists. The previous
it's a real skill, isn't it, to try and condense all that information into a limited amount of words. So I might stick with short stories for now. But who knows?
You see where it goes. Okay, very well, Ayo. Thank you so much for your time. Very interesting interview, very spirited, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Likewise, as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and best of luck. And the judges will.